This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Welcome to this is the third class in the series, monthly halacha series of laws of Shabbat kitchen. The first two classes we spoke about more cooking, what is the definition of cooking on Shabbat. We spoke about what is kli rishon, kli sheni, kli shlishi. We spoke about how to prepare food before Shabbat so that you would be able to use the blech to put the food on in a permissible way. We briefly mentioned, are you allowed to put food back on fire on Shabbat? Already cooked food. Today we're going to speak more about it. Today we're continuing with also topic of cooking on Shabbat, and if we have time we're going to go to other food preparation halachot. Today we're going to start with how to make tea on Shabbat. We know that we're not allowed to cook on Shabbat, and seemingly when we take a tea bag and we put it in hot water, it cooks the tea inside the tea bag and produces water with the tea flavor in it. So how can we potentially make tea on Shabbat if in the end the result is almost the same? Whether, as we're going to learn, you do kli sheni, kli shlishi, in the end the tea still gives color and gives taste to the water, and it looks like we're cooking. And keep in mind that tea leaves, unlike coffee, are not cooked in advance. So seems very problematic. And here we're going to learn that not everything that produces the desired result on Shabbat is forbidden. Not everything that changes on Shabbat is forbidden. Not everything that looks like to us cooking is in fact cooking. And we're going to find out what is the exact definition of cooking. We learned in the first class that according to Torah, only when you cook something on fire or in a utensil warmed up by fire, it's considered cooking according to the Torah. Meaning if you take something raw on direct flame and you cook it, that's prohibited according to Torah. If you take a pot and you heat it up on high flame and then you remove it from fire and then you crack an egg on it, that's still considered forbidden according to Torah. However, if you take up the same pot and leave it out in the hot sun and you heat up the pot so much that it's able to cook, and then you take this pot and you crack an egg on it and it cooks, that's not considered cooking according to Torah. However, rabbinically, it still is considered cooking. Why? Because it looks too much like heating up the pot on fire. Because to an outside observer, when he sees you cracking the egg on a hot pot, he doesn't know where the pot was heated, whether it was heated in the sun or in fire. And the last possibility, taking out a cold pot into the sunlight and cracking an egg into this pot and letting it be heated by the fire, by the sunlight directly, that is not only not forbidden rabbinically, but it's even permitted. It's permissible according to halacha to cook like this on Shabbat. Which means even though I'm taking a raw egg and I'm converting it into a cooked egg on Shabbat, it's permissible. So not every change on Shabbat from raw to cooked is forbidden. Now, why isn't this forbidden? And the reason is, number one, Torah did not forbid it, and number two, it does not look like cooking. So we have two ideas over here. Number one, in order to permit something on Shabbat, it should actually not be cooking according to Torah. And number two, it should not look like cooking. Now, coming to the tea question. When I take tea leaves that were not cooked and I put them into my cup of hot water, is this considered cooking, number one? And is this considered that it looks like cooking? So in order to solve the first problem, that it shouldn't be cooking according to Torah, it's enough we say Kli sheini eno mivashel. The second vessel does not cook. Meaning, if I cook water in a pot, that's the first vessel. If I pour this water into a second utensil, that's considered Kli sheini, second utensil. And according to Torah, that does not cook. However, there are some kinds of food that are cooked easily, and they are called kalei bishul, easily cooked foods. And we say that it's possible for easily cooked foods to be cooked in hot water that is in the second utensil. Even though the temperature of the water dropped from being transferred from the pot into this utensil, so it does not have so much power to cook, but still easily cooked foods it can cook. So to solve this problem for tea, which is considered easily cooked food, we pour it into a kli shlishi, into a third cup, meaning the pot is the first cup, the first utensil is the second, and the actual cup from which we're going to drink is the third utensil. Now, according to Torah, the third utensil does not cook at all. So we solved one problem. It's not considered cooking in the third utensil, even kalei bishul. What about the second problem? That it looks like cooking. So now we ask ourselves, if I put something in a cup, a teacup or foam cup, does that look like cooking? If someone sees me on Shabbat with a cup like this, will they think that I'm cooking? No, because usually we cook with pots, we cook with pans. But if I take a cup, pour hot water from the urn, and then I put it in a second cup, which is the third utensil now, it's so far removed from the actual pot where the water was heated that we're not concerned that it looks like cooking. It does not look like cooking, and therefore making tea in a third utensil, kli shlishi, is permissible. So this is one way to prepare tea. You pour water into one cup from the urn, then you pour it into the second cup. The second cup is kosher to make tea in. You just put the tea bag, or you put tea leaves in there, and it's fine. Another way to make tea on Shabbat is what's called tea essence. And that is when you cook tea leaves or tea bags before Shabbat, and you make concentrate. You put a few tea bags for a small amount of water, and you actually cook it on fire. And we have a rule that once something is cooked, it cannot be re-cooked. That applies to solids. And therefore these tea leaves, once you cook them, even if later you pour hot water on those same tea leaves, it's not going to be a problem. So once you have the tea essence, there are two ways to make the tea. Number one, you actually take the tea bags out and you pour hot water on them. And that's going to be permissible because these tea bags were cooked already. Or you actually take this concentrate, the dark liquid, and you add it to hot water. And how do you add it to hot water? There are two ways. Either you pour water from the urn into the teacup, and then you add some of the tea essence on top. Even if the tea essence is cold already, that's fine, because this is kli sheni, the cup that I'm using. It's a second utensil. And plus, the tea essence itself was already heated before Shabbat. So it's not a problem. A second way is I pour the tea essence on the bottom, and then I add hot water directly from the urn on top of it. That's also permissible. And that's not cooking. Not only that, the first way that I told you put hot water in first and then you add tea essence. Some poskim question it and they say it looks like you're coloring the liquid. You're taking clear liquid and you're adding color to it on purpose because you want it to be good tea that looks like tea. So you're actually coloring it on purpose. So there are some who forbid it because of it, but according to us, it's permissible because we say that there is no coloring by food. And again, somebody who wants to be strict and pour the tea essence in first and then the hot water, that's good to do. But if for some reason that is hard, you're allowed to pour hot water in and then tea essence on top. Similar halacha, let's say you want to give grape juice to children and you don't want to give it to them straight because it's too sweet, so you want to dilute it. So again, there are two ways. Either you pour grape juice in and then you add cold water, or you're even allowed to pour cold water, half a cup, and then add grape juice, and even though you're coloring the water that was there originally, it's permissible. Again, if you can, it's good to be strict and pour grape juice in first and then water. But if for some reason you cannot, that's fine. You can pour water in first and then grape juice.
This is Sephardic?
This is according to Sephardim, yes.
Also regarding klisheni, I learned from Ashkenazim, like even if there's a little bit of residue in the water, it's a problem pouring straight from the pot in there.
Yes, so
you really have to make sure it's dry.
So yes, there is a question. If I, for example, washed my cup and now I want to pour hot water into it from the urn, and the droplets of water that are there will get cooked. So some say it is a problem, but again, for us, we do not consider it to be a problem, and therefore you don't have to dry it. You don't have to. If you dry it, it's praiseworthy, but you don't have to dry it. And not only that, even if you have actual cold water there, even small amount, it's still permissible. And that is because, number one, you're not putting it into Kli Rishon. You're pouring from Kli Rishon. And we say that what's called Irui Kli Rishon, hot water that is poured from the first utensil, only has enough power to cook surface of the food that it is being poured into. And when you're dealing with liquid doesn't have surface that can cook, because as soon as hot water pours into that cold water, it's going to mix, and there is no surface that will heat up. So again, according to Sephardim, you're allowed to, for example, take a little bit milk and then put hot water on top of it, or you can pour hot water and then add milk into it, or water, or any other liquid.
Without klisheni?
Without klisheni, yes. Yes.
What if you're putting either ice into your hot tea, like ice tea or whatever, or the other way around, pouring hot water into a cup of ice?
If you want to add ice to your hot tea to make it colder, that's also permissible. Again, your tea is in the kli sheni, and when you add ice to it, it's just going to cool it down. Nothing's going to get cooked. Or you have ice on the bottom, and now you're pouring water in. Also, it's fine. And here also you might say, oh, but the ice cube is solid. It might have surface, but as soon as you pour the water in, it's going to melt. And there's not going to be the surface that we can say got cooked.
Regardless of the quantity, like if I have a bottle of milk for baby and I want to give it, I can pour
Yeah. Yes, you can just pour a little bit hot water into the milk and it's going to warm it up for the baby. Yes. What about putting a slice of lemon into your hot cup of tea? You made tea and you want to put fresh lemon into it. The tea is very hot. And that is permissible. Why is that permissible? Lemon seemingly is something that cooks easily, especially a thin slice of lemon. You pour boiling water on it, it already does not feel fresh. Why are you allowed to put it into a kli sheni and you don't have to put it in kli shlishi, into a third cup? And the answer is, we're not allowed to cook something in kli sheni if it's kalea bishul, but if you're adding it to hot water in kli sheni, not to cook, but just to add flavor, that is not considered cooking. So therefore, even if you did not use kli shlishi, let's say you just poured hot water, hot boiling water into the first cup, which is the kli sheni. You pour the hot water from the urn, you're allowed to add lemon. You just want to drink hot water with lemon flavor. That's permissible because lemon, we're not interested in cooking lemon, we're interested in just getting the flavor of the lemon. Similarly, if you have mint leaves, checked mint leaves, you're not worried about bugs, even though it's fresh, and even though the leaves are very thin and they will get cooked in kli sheni, just like tea leaves, since you're not adding it to actually cook, you don't have intent to cook them, but just to add flavor, you're adding it at the end, you're not adding it at the beginning, it's permissible. Okay, any questions about tea? Yes.
Let's say I'm making a cup of tea for myself, and I have a tea bag in my cup, and then so I take the water from the hot water urn, put it in a cup, and then from that cup I put it into my cup with the bag of tea. So the bag is already cooked. Can I take this bag, put it into another cup, and then go straight to the urn?
That's a good question. What if you already made tea, and now the tea bag already gave out its color, flavor, seemingly it was cooked already? Can I take this tea bag and pour hot water from the urn directly onto it? And the answer is no, because even though it looks like cooking, but we said halachically it's not cooking. So halachically it was not cooked. In kli shlishi, or like you mentioned, irui from kli sheni, meaning you put it in your second cup and you poured it from the first cup directly, that's also permitted according to Sephardim. So there are two ways: either pouring hot water into the second cup first and then putting the tea bag, or even putting the tea bag in first and then pouring the hot water from the first cup. According to Ashkenazim, that would be problematic. They would say first pour it into the third kli shlishi, or the second cup, and only then add tea. According to us, even pouring from the first cup onto tea bag is okay. But that tea bag is still considered not cooked. But you would be able to add more hot water onto it from another cup. Another question: after you are satisfied with the color of your tea, can you take the tea bag out? And again, for Sephardim, you are allowed to take it out. Yes, straight, without taking any water with it, without using the spoon. You can just pull it out by the string. Alternatively, you can take it out with a spoon. Ashkenazim hold that you have to take it out with a spoon for two reasons. Number one, that together with the tea bag, some liquid should be lifted from the tea. There shouldn't be borer. And also so that as you are picking it up from its own weight, water should not be squeezed out of it. So we say both of these issues are not a problem for us, and therefore you can pull it out by its tag. Yes. Now, what about coffee? Coffee, if it's instant coffee, it was already cooked before Shabbat, and therefore I can make instant coffee even pouring water directly from the urn. But it is preferable that you should pour water from the urn first and then add the coffee. That is preferable, but even putting coffee in first and then pouring from the urn is also permissible. That is only instant coffee. If it's actual coffee beans or ground coffee that was not roasted, I don't know if that's possible, but then you would not be able to do it. But if it's roasted ground coffee, you can pour hot water directly onto it on Shabbat. So, for example, if you have Turkish coffee, which is roasted coffee that was finely ground, you can put it into your cup and pour hot water onto it directly. Next topic is Chazara, using blech on Shabbat. On Shabbat, if you have food that was on the blech and you took it off to serve, you're allowed to put it back on if it's fully cooked. The second requirement is that the food should be solid. If the food is liquid, then you have to make sure that it is still very hot. You take soup, for example, of the blech, you serve it quickly, and you put it on the blech right away. Again, making sure that the soup is already fully cooked and it's still very hot. If it's solid, you don't have to worry that it should not cool down. You take the solid food off the blech, you serve it. As long as it is fully cooked, you can put it on even if it's cold. Not only that, according to Sephardim, we have an extra leniency that even if it's the food that was not on the blech at all on Shabbat, you cooked the food before Shabbat and you left it in the refrigerator because you didn't need it until the next day, then on Shabbat you can take it out from the refrigerator and put it on the blech. Again, if it's fully cooked.
And that includes liquids like soup?
Liquids like soup you would not be able to, because liquids have to be already hot. How hot do the liquids have to be? According to Sephardim, we're more strict about this, and according to us it has to be very hot, 175 degrees Fahrenheit, which means you really don't have a lot of time. You take soup off, you serve it quickly, and you have to put it back right away.
And this applies also if it's not directly under the fire, like if it's to the side, because blechs are big, sometimes you can have one flame on, but the whole thing...
If you're not putting directly onto the fire, you have to put it in a place that will not heat it above this temperature. It can keep it hot below 175, but once it heats it up above, you're going to have a problem according to all opinions. Ashkenazim are more lenient in this regard. They say that as long as the soup is a little bit warm, you're allowed to put it back on fire. So, but they do have other stringencies. For example, they have to keep one hand on the pot while serving, not to remove your mind from the fact that you have to put the pot back. For us, we don't have to hold it as long as you don't put it on the ground. Putting something on the ground or away from sight on the refrigerator shows that I'm not planning to put it back on, and then if it's liquid, I cannot put it back even if it's hot. Yes.
So you could warm up a liquid as long as it's below that temperature?
This is, we're talking about liquid that was on the blech before and was hot. you can put it back as long as it's still hot. If it is less, then you put it not directly on the fire where it's not going to. But if you have liquid that was cold, then we use different temperature for Yad Soledet Bo, what's considered hot. And that is only 104 degrees, which is a temperature that is uncomfortable for you. Again, as we mentioned in the previous classes, the temperature of jacuzzi is, I think, 103, 104, not everybody can handle, and 105 is already dangerous. So 104 is the cutoff point. If you're trying to make it warm and you put it into a place that cannot potentially make it hot, that's okay. But you cannot rely on the fact that I'm going to put it there and before it gets hot, I'm going to take it off. That you're not allowed to do. You have to make sure that in the place that you're putting it, it cannot reach 104 degrees. Okay, now next topic is hatmana. Hatmana means insulating. Insulating a pot of food. If you have a hot pot of food and you want to keep it hot, you don't want to keep it on fire. Maybe you don't want to keep fire on Shabbat at all. And you want it for the meal, the night meal. So you're saying, by the time men come from the synagogue, it's going to be just 1 hour. For that 1 hour, I'm going to keep it hot with towels. Is that permissible? So if the food, if it's still before Shabbat, and you're covering it with just towels, that's permissible. Or you're covering with anything that does not add heat. There are some things that naturally add heat. For example, if there are decomposing leaves, they will produce heat by themselves. So such leaves, you wouldn't be able to cover your pot even before Shabbat. But regular blankets, towels, you're allowed to, but it has to be before Shabbat. Once Shabbat begins, we're not allowed to insulate food. Why not? And that is because when you show that your intention is to preserve the heat, there's a danger that if you notice that the food is getting cold, since you're so worried that it should stay hot, you might actually heat it up on fire. And why did I say that you're not allowed to insulate it with some material that produces heat, like decomposing leaves? And that is, again, even though it's before Shabbat, but since I'm showing that I want it to be hot, and I'm so worried that I'm even insulating it with material that adds heat, someone might come along and say, look, she insulated her pot with decomposing leaves which add heat. I'm going to insulate my pot with coals, with the hot burning coals. And then it will actually cause them to, when they want to later take the pot off, to actually move the coals or even stoke the coals to make it hotter. So rabbinically it's forbidden to insulate before Shabbat with material that adds heat, and on Shabbat even with material that does not add heat. Now, what if you do want to cover your pot with a towel on Shabbat? What should you do? Number one, it's only considered insulation if you cover it from all sides, meaning the top and the sides. However, if you only cover it on top, that's permissible, even on Shabbat, provided that the food is fully cooked. So, for example, you have a pot of any kind of food or savor, and you want it to stay hot. Let's say the flame is not so hot, so you're allowed to fold the towel and just cover the top. But you should not let it hang over the sides. What if you do want to let the towel hang over the sides. So we have another rule: as long as the towel does not touch the sides of the pot, you're allowed to hang it. How? You take a cover from a larger pot, you put it on your smaller pot, so the cover is going to extend beyond the walls, and then if you cover it over, even though it covers from all sides, but since it doesn't touch the sides, it's permissible. What if I have a pot with the towel on top? And I would like to, and I added it before Shabbat, so it's not a problem. And I have challah, or I have another small pot that I would like to put on top of the big pot. Can I lift the towel, put this pot of cold, solid, cooked food underneath and cover it again? Will it be considered as new insulation, and therefore, since we said you're not allowed to insulate on Shabbat, it would be a problem? Or since this particular insulation was already there and I'm just adding to it, would it be permissible? So the halakha is that such a thing is permissible. So again, if you have solid cooked food, you're allowed to add it under the insulation. You remove the insulation, put the pot in, and you cover it again. As long as there was one pot there, you can add more pots.
From all sides.
Yes. Another halacha is that the prohibition of insulation only applies to hot foods. If the food is below Yad Soledet, below this 104, 105 degrees Fahrenheit, since the food is already so cool, it shows that you're not worried about keeping it hot. So for example, if you have cold food and it's a hot day and you don't want it to warm up, you're allowed to cover it with towels even on Shabbat. Let's say you're outside and you put a bottle of juice and it's cold and you don't want the sun to warm it up, you're allowed to cover it, even though you're insulating it. But since you're not trying to preserve heat, you're trying to preserve the cold and you're trying to keep the heat out, that's permissible. And a very practical halacha is the prohibition of insulation only applies to kli rishon, to the utensil in which the food was actually cooked. However, if you pour the contents of the pot into a second utensil, it already shows that I'm not interested in the heat, because if I was, I would keep it in the first one. And therefore, it's not prohibited to cover it. The example is you have a teapot and you want to cover it with the special cover to keep it hot. That's permissible because the teapot is kli sheni. It's the second utensil, and therefore the decree against hatmana, against insulation, was never made on it. The same thing if you made tea in your teacup and you don't want it to cool down, you're allowed to cover it with napkin, with a towel, anything you want. That's permissible. Another example is thermos. You pour hot water from the urn into your thermos, even though thermos is already insulated, and you're covering it on top and preserving the heat, that's permissible because the thermos becomes kli sheni. The next topic today is using crock pot. Some don't allow using crock pot on Shabbat because it looks like you're insulating. Why? Because you have heating element inside, and you have something that surrounds your pot on all sides. So it looks like you insulated your inner pot in the outer structure. However, both among Ashkenazi poskim and Sephardi poskim, there are those that permit it, and they say that this is not considered hatmana, insulation, because insulation is when you cook something in one pot and then you cover it. Here, in the actual pot that you're cooking, that's how it's designed. It's designed to have the heating element and this structure around it. So that does not look like hatmana, insulation. That looks like actual cooking. So then, why is it permissible if it's actual cooking? So we say that it's like a blech. As long as you put it in before Shabbat and you set it, you can keep it there. Another reason why we permit using crock pot is because we said the insulation is forbidden if you're planning to use this food Friday night. Since you're planning to use it then and you want it to stay hot, we are worried that you might warm it up on fire. However, if you are saying, I'm not going to eat it at night, I'm going to eat it tomorrow morning, so I'm not interested in raising the flame, I'm not interested in keeping it hot, because I'm not eating it today anyway. So the prohibition of insulation doesn't apply. And therefore, we're allowed to use crock pot. Some advise that in order to avoid this issue, you should put some, you make balls from aluminum foil, 3 balls. You put it on the bottom of the crock pot, and you put the actual pot on top of those balls. This way, it lifts the pot a little bit off. So it serves as a separation, so it's not insulating it because there is a gap. It's not required, but some do it, and it is good to do.
Isn't the point of the crock pot that it slowly cooks the food over several hours? So is that an issue by itself that the food is technically cooking?
Even though the food is being cooked by the crock pot throughout Shabbat, and even though you put it in there and it wasn't fully cooked, it was raw or half cooked, and it's being finished on Shabbat, it's not a problem, because we have a rule that any process that you start before Shabbat, you can allow it to finish by itself on Shabbat. For example, cooking. Another example, lighting a candle. You light a candle and it's burning on Shabbat, but it's not a problem because it's an automatic process that you started before. It is allowed to continue on Shabbat. And by the way, I'm going to mention that, for example, are you allowed to start a washer, laundry, or a dryer before Shabbat, that it should continue into Shabbat? So according to Ashkenazim, they don't allow it. Not because of this, but because it makes noise, and it, for the neighbors or anybody who visits you, it looks like you're doing laundry on Shabbat. But according to Sephardim, it's permissible for the same reason as the crock pot or cooking putting food on to be cooked on Shabbat. Any process you start before Shabbat can continue on Shabbat automatically. So here I start the washing machine before, and it continues into Shabbat by itself. That's permissible.
Well, just about that, are you allowed to put it in the dryer? Would you then be able to take it after Shabbat?
It depends on 2 things. Number one, if it's a kind of dryer that when you open the door, nothing happens.
Yeah.
No lights, no dials, nothing. Then that's good. And also, the clothing has to be wearable, not to be considered muktzeh, something that you put out of your mind, something that you know you cannot use right now. You're not planning to use it because it's very wet, so then it becomes muktzah and it stays muktzah for the rest of Shabbat. However, if by the time Shabbat came, it was already in the dryer for a few minutes, so if necessary, even though it's damp, but I can still wear it, so then you could do it. You could take it out on Shabbat, but you shouldn't fold it and put it away on Shabbat. Okay, now with the crock pot, if it has a dial to change the temperature, warm, hot, you should remove the dial or cover it with tape. Okay. Next, we're going to go to the new topic, and that is salting or preserving food on Shabbat. One of the melachot on Shabbat is taking skin of an animal and processing it, putting salt and other chemicals into it, and that will make it more durable, more long-lasting. Similarly, we're not allowed to take raw food, put it into salt or into vinegar to preserve it. And therefore, not only if your intent is actually to make pickles, but even if it looks like you're making pickles, it's still forbidden. What does it mean? You should not take a large amount of vegetables and sprinkle salt over it, because since you're doing it over a few pieces, it looks like you are doing it for future. However, if it's only one piece that you're actually planning to eat, that's not a problem. Also, if it's a kind of a vegetable that we usually don't preserve, or it's in a form that we usually don't preserve, for example, a cut tomato. We usually don't preserve cut tomatoes. If a tomato is whole, you're not going to sprinkle salt on it anyway because it's not going to stick. But if it's a whole tomato and you're throwing it into salt water, that looks like preserving. However, if it's a cut tomato, whether you're sprinkling salt on it or putting it into salt water, that's permissible. And therefore, if you have cut tomatoes on a plate, even though it's a lot of tomatoes, but they're all cut, you're allowed to sprinkle salt on it. So some things that would be problematic would be whole cucumbers, whole tomatoes, onion, even if it's cut, and garlic, whether it's cut or whole, and radishes. These are just common things that we use in salads, and at the same time these are things that we preserve. Yes?
Your intention is to make a salad with these preservatives like vinegar and oil or
Yes.
lemon juice.
Yes,
But
very
you
good.
happen to have a lot of leftover and you want to put it away.
There are two things here. If you just want to make sure it doesn't spoil, you can just put it in the refrigerator, right? That's not the problem. On the other hand, let's say you have a salad that you want to add salt, but it has some of these vegetables that you should not be salting. So one way to avoid this issue is to add a little bit oil to your salad before you put salt or immediately after. By putting oil on, you're showing that my intent is not to preserve it, but to eat it now. And also because salt takes away some of the oil takes away some of the power of salt to penetrate the food, and therefore again it shows your intent that you don't want to preserve. Now, for when you have food that is usually not preserved, you're allowed to put salt on it. For example, if you have eggs You peeled a lot of eggs, or you cut them in half, and now you want to sprinkle salt on it. That's fine. You can sprinkle salt over many eggs. Or you have meat that you cut up, you're allowed to sprinkle salt on it.
So if I had yasmi and I forgot to salt it, I'm not allowed to salt it.
You're allowed to.
Are you allowed?
Unless I break it up.
No, you don't have to break it up. That was just an example. If you have piece of meat or chicken or even a whole egg or a whole chicken, since we usually don't preserve, yes, then that is okay. If your cucumbers or cucumber slices are peeled, then you're also allowed to sprinkle salt on it, because when we pickle cucumbers, they're usually with skin on, even if it's sliced, but the skin is usually on. If you remove the skin, whether it's whole or sliced, you can add salt to it. So basically that means if you're making Israeli salad with cut tomatoes and peeled cucumbers that are cut, that would not be a problem, because we usually don't pickle such a thing. Similarly, we're not allowed to add a lot of salt to plain water, to make salt water, because that looks like we're preparing brine for pickling. And that's why when Pesach comes and it falls on Shabbat, we have to prepare salt water in advance, or make very small amount. You cannot make large amount, that looks like pickling. Sometimes you buy pickles in the store and they are half ready. What are they called? Half sour. And you taste them and you feel they need to be in the brine a little longer. You would not be able to put it back into the brine on Shabbat, because it would continue the process of pickling. So take out as many pickles as you think you can use, and don't put it back. Put it in a separate bag and put it in the refrigerator.
But if they're fully pickled.
If it's fully pickled, then it's fine. You can put it back. This only applies to salt and vinegar. However, it does not apply to sugar. Even though we use sugar to preserve things, but this prohibition did not extend to sugar, and therefore, let's say you have a few pieces of lemon or strawberries and you want to sprinkle sugar over it, that's permissible. The next halakha for today is kneading. Kneading means you take liquid and you take dry powder, you mix it together, and you produce one paste. An example is in making bread, you make dough, you take flour and water. But it does not only apply to flour and water, it applies, for example, mixing water with earth to make clay. There are different kinds of earth. Some earth is just sand, you put it in, it just sinks to the bottom and nothing happens. But some earth, if you mix it with water, it will actually make like Play-Doh or clay. Or you take cement powder, you add water to it, and you knead it to make cement paste. That is also prohibited. Yes?
So, something that I know I would use is if we're making cinnamon buns, water with confectioner's sugar. Is that okay to do?
Yes, that would be a problem. You would have to prepare it before Shabbat to mix water with confectionery sugar if you're making it a paste. If it's liquid, it's not a problem. But if it forms a paste, if it's
Not
thick,
to make it hard, but
as long as it's thick,
it's horrible.
again, if it's liquid, like let's say liquid soap, that would be permissible, but if it's harder, then you're not allowed. Now, when you have flour or the things that I mentioned before, dry clay or dry cement, and you're adding water to it, even adding water is already prohibited. Even though you're not mixing it, you're just pouring water in, is already prohibited. However, things that I said that do not mix with water, like sand or earth that is not made from clay, I'm allowed to put water in it, but I'm not allowed to mix it. So, for example, I'm allowed to pour water into sand or put sand into water, but I cannot mix it to actually play with it and try to dissolve it in water.
What about baby food with the oatmeal?
Yes, we're going to speak about baby food soon. I just want to cover the general rules. Now, what if you have solid that will dissolve into water, like salt or sugar? If it actually dissolves into water, then there is no prohibition of kneading or instant coffee. What about making jello or pudding? By jello, there are different opinions. Some say, since the final form that it's going to take is going to be congealed, it's forbidden. Some say that since at the time when you're actually mixing it, it's liquid. Only later, when it cools down, when it stands, then it's going to congeal. It's okay. So there are stringent opinions that you shouldn't do it, and there are lenient opinions that allow it. It's better to be stringent, but if somebody did it already, it's permitted to be used. Also, to mix potato puree flakes, to make potato puree, that's also prohibited. Or baby cereal, if you want to make thick paste, you cannot do it. However, you're allowed to mix it if you're planning to make it a little bit more liquidy than usual. And even then, when you add more milk or water than usual, you should not mix it in a regular way, but you should mix it in a crisscross fashion to show the difference. An important halakha we have about kneading is that once something is kneaded, it cannot be kneaded again. Meaning, if you added water to something and you already made the paste, and now you want the paste to be a little bit more liquidy, that's okay. You can add a little bit more water and you can remix it. For example, you have tahina or hummus, and it's a little bit too thick, and you want to add a little more water or lemon juice and mix it more to make it thinner. That's permissible.
But if it wasn't, if it's on its original paste form.
If it's for example chickpea powder,
Right.
then you wouldn't be able to add.
Okay, fine. But
If it's
like solid runny.
right, and same with tahina. If it's tahina powder, if there's such a thing, then you wouldn't be able. But tahina that they sell in jars, that's already a paste, you're allowed to add more water or lemon juice and mix it. But when you're mixing it, don't mix it vigorously, meaning let's say you have some tahina paste on the bottom, you add water, don't shake it, the whole bottle, but rather mix it gently with a spoon.
Does it matter what order you put it in first, like with the baby cereal? First water or first cereal? Or
As long as you're making it liquidy, then it's fine. If you want to make olivier, for example, vegetable salad, are you allowed to add mayonnaise to it? Because the mayonnaise will thicken it and hold it together. on Shabbat.
That way.
Seemingly, you have little pieces that are just
But it's not a paste.
Yeah.
It's like clumps of vegetables.
little pieces of vegetables, and with mayonnaise you hold them
It's not
together.
like a mixture that can't be separated. Like when you need olive oil, but you can't undo it.
Yes. So you're right. It is permissible to add mayonnaise to salad, like potato salad or olivier, because again, it does not form one paste. You can still see separate pieces, and you can separate it. Yes, it's permissible. Now, the last set of halachot for today is called dash. Dash means threshing. Do you have it on your paper? It's not there, so you can add it. It's called dash or threshing. What does it mean? According to Torah, before you make bread, you harvest the wheat. You separate before separating, you then bring the stalks with the kernels to the threshing floor, and there you either beat the stalks with sticks or with special lashes, or you put boards, heavy boards, on them, and the animal walks around, and the boards press on the stalks, and they separate the chaff from the kernels. They separate the straw and the stalk from the kernel. That's called threshing. So basically, whenever you take off the shell from the fruit, by pressing it on it, that's forbidden. So what's an example?
Like peanuts?
Could be, for example, if you have, if you can find actual grain, raw grain that still has the outer husks around it, and you would put it on your hand, a few, and go like this, pressing on it, that would be prohibited. What if you want to eat it? So then you would have to take each grain and press it with your finger and eat it. Not press all of them at the same time, but one at a time with your fingers. Peanuts is another example. Don't take a few peanuts and press on them with your palms, but rather take individual peanut and crush it only with your fingertips. Similarly, pistachios, usually we eat them with fingertips anyway, but similarly you would not be able to use a utensil or your palms to press on a few of them at a time.
What about sun seeds?
Sunflower seeds, same idea. You can take each one and break it, but not press on them with a utensil or hands. Or similarly, if you have green peas in a pod, also you can break each individual pod to take out the green peas, but you wouldn't be able to do it with your hands. If you have walnuts or almonds with the shell on, you're allowed to break the shell and eat one at a time, even using a utensil, like a nut cracker, but only if you're planning to eat it then. If you're planning to crack a few nuts and separate them and eat them later, that is not permitted if you're using a utensil. And only if you're using your fingertips, you can crack a few nuts and set them aside, and then once you have a bunch, then you can eat. So for example, sunflower seeds, ideally you should eat one at a time. Crack and eat, crack and eat. If you want to peel a few of them for a child or for yourself to eat at the same time, you should not use a utensil. Only you use your fingertips, break a few, and then eat or feed the child. This concludes the class for today. Next time, Bezat Hashem, we're going to learn about borer and sechita, squeezing juice from the food.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.